Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Wicked Generation, and we are its redeemed. And tell me, how plugged in are we to our phones, to screens, to earbuds, if you would? How deeply plugged in are we to the Matrix? Let's explore this topic today. Or I'm going to be talking about technology, whether or not we're dependent on it, or the marks of dependency, and a commentary on The Social Dilemma, which is a new Netflix documentary that I think would be relevant to the discussion. Why is that? Because I believe that social media is, if you would, the most consummate form of our interest and usage of social media. It's probably the number one use for the individual. I believe that's what the individual spends the most time on when they're on the internet. And so, I want to first talk about how our phones are essentially another organ for us. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not a single person that you don't see walking down the street nowadays that isn't a cyborg. That's right, a cyborg. Well, why is this? Because an organ performs some sort of function for us, really. It's an organized series of tissues and cells that fulfill a particular role. Well, why do I call it an organ then? Well, because in some sense, it's our phones are another brain to run calculi. In our sense, they are vocal cords to talk, and to do so remotely. Then there are a set of eyes and ears even to explore the hyperreal, the internet. But what do I mean by the hyperreal exactly? Well, the imposed simulacra or projected images that we experience when we go onto the internet. Now, because we're behind a screen, we're able to see and experience so many things that we've never before, And I believe this generation is one that has been exposed to perhaps the most sort of stimuli, the most exotic sights and sounds possible. And yet, they haven't really experienced any of it to its fullest possible depth. These, in fact, aren't really even experiences quite. And this is going to be the hallmark of this age. Quantity over quality, so to speak. But a little more on that later. Yes, we experience all these things about intimacy or sensation, and, well, in the great circus of ideas and visions and sights and sounds that we experience when we're on a social media platform or browsing through the web, oftentimes things become almost unverifiable for our own selves, Whatever else someone posts or the images that we see, the line between perception and projection is actually quite blurred. They almost become one and the same, perception and projection does, and then, well, people consequently become disillusioned. This is often the case for many of us, and I think all of us at certain points. Everyone is their own PR agent now. They're their own model. Each with their own platform, And as individuals, active participants in the digital circus that's constructed by circuits, well, is it a bad thing that we're all so busy trying to almost project the best possible version of ourselves out into the world to make ourselves feel better, to hunt around and seek for validation, or to experience different sort of stimuli, things most foreign to us, to almost grow and expand our consciousness? Is this all a bad thing? Well, when we can't unplug. You see, when we can't vacate from the hyperreal, our digital homes have become prisons. Consequently, our faculties will atrophy. We are less intelligent nowadays in the traditional sense than, say, the Victorian gentleman. Unless you're me. We're not as strong as the tenant farmer that's always have to work the fields for 10 hours a day. Unless you're me. But nor are we even as handy as the Renaissance man. Which is actually not me for once. But in any event, as we spend more and more time disconnected from the real world and navigating this cyberspace, if you would, well, not only does it come with its certain advantages that we ought to learn about, but there's also a certain base part of ourselves. After all, we still are within the physical, real world. We still interface with technology via the means of our bodies, being able to touch the screen or say certain commands the microphone will pick up on. We still need these bodies, and we should effectively make use of them. And yet, for all the time spent on them, and as the advent of all these great and marvelous inventions we make, well, the more we improve upon ourselves externally, if you would, the less we have to rely upon our own survivalistic capabilities, that which is intrinsic to us and it can be developed out of us. Well, what do I mean? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, correct? Well, now that there is less need, there is, we're still driving development forward. We're still inventing things. The question is, what are the nature of the inventions now? Not only that, and with need out of the picture, how is that directly affecting us? Well, now with need out of the picture, yes, there is less need to become, intelligent within our own right. Now we must learn how to wield the tools of conventionality, things to bring convenience to us, if you would. Things we kind of need to know how to interface with if we want to interact in the modern world now. It's so much of our business is built upon online transactions rather than in-person bartering, you know what I mean? What I'm trying to say is that with the cost, what comes as a cost of a liberated body is to a certain extent an enslaved mind. I want to bring in the idea of the social dilemma, that documentary, and yes, it does make a few good points, though to a certain extent it is also trying to it tries to gin up as much of a crisis as your average news tabloid at this point. What do I mean? Well, in many instances, it compares the mind of someone who's on social media to that of a gambler, almost ensnared by the neurochemical devices of and devices the gambler experiences. And fair enough, that's a good analogy. As a matter of fact, in the very first take of this recording, I was talking about the psychological profile of a gambler and comparing it before I even watched the documentary. Well, let's start with that. Yes, and looking for validation online, on social media, as that is again the consummation, I believe, the most prime picture of what the digital age looks like and us interfacing with it. Look for validation. There is always a great chance to, perhaps if we keep refreshing the screen, we'll have more likes on our latest post, or that we'll see something that sends a bit of a rush to us, perhaps some far-off site or someone doing an amazing trick in a little video feed. Yes, there's always potential for this. And we think as we keep getting our fix, more and more time sunk, more and more time wasted. Although all of these things, as much as you'd love to slam, as much as we love to dunk on people and condemn them, these social media platforms and their designers for making addictive algorithms, well, they're only trying to increase your time to spend on there. After all, that is their prerogative. Is it first and foremost the biggest necessity that we hold them morally accountable, or hold ourselves personally accountable? Well, what do I mean? Well, yes, there's a few people out there who are incapable of managing their own time, and they need to turn to other people then to help them out with that. They need to externalize their time management, fair enough. But for the vast majority of us, it does speak volumes to a certain phenomena where technology has made it so easy for us and so convenient for us to just hang around because, again, we now have more free time than ever, unless you're working a particularly taxing job, one that mandates a lot of time. Well, technology, it kind of makes it so that we have to work less as a society, you know what I mean? All the time that we spend, again, making things has been drastically cut, providing services, connecting people. Well, I mean, nowadays social media can do that instantly. So, consequently, without stimuli in the external world, we must turn to the hyperreal, a reality that we map around ourselves, even if fictitiously so and synthetically so. This reality is made. It offers more promise potential for the average person than perhaps their own boring lives. And this isn't to say that people with boring lives are automatically hooked on social media, and that people who live very rich lives, aren't. Of course, there is room for both in each other's life, but there is that certain principle and trend where someone who is actually working towards the fulfillment of their dreams, or perhaps chasing a great big ambition, sort of chemical field that they, if you want to talk comparatively as far as neurochemistry is concerned, the rush of chemicals that someone is going to actually enjoy when they actually attain the thing that they want in the real world is going to be significantly more than someone who gets a like on the post on social media, especially because likes on social media can come so quickly and easily. It's the law of diminishing returns, if you would, or even quantity too. When you have many of something, you get more and more of it. Inherently, each instance of whatever you're getting becomes less and less valuable because there's more of it. Which begs the question, how do you know if you're dependent on your screen? How do you know if you're dependent on your phone, this organ that you now have, that you get anxious if you don't have next to you? Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, it's actually a good thing that you feel kind of worried when your phone goes missing. It's not by your side. Because that thing compresses so many different difficult tasks. It handles so many different functions for you with such ease. And to lose that would be an extreme disadvantage for your own, almost immediate survivalistic capabilities, because again, now you're less able to complete certain calculi. You have less means of perception now, less information to draw upon. To your lower, more basic mind, that's a pretty horrible thing. With that lifeline gone, it does, I think, to some people who've done digital disconnects, they've attained quite a few benefits, they would say, right? They are less anxious because they know that, the pressure of having that, being always behind that podium, being one's own PR agent, always performing behind on our top of the platform, that they are granted on social media, that's now gone. However, doing these detoxes is really just a rudimentary problem, because once they return to their phone, they might be more engrossed than ever. What needs to come first is the right mindset. First and foremost, you need to understand that our phones and the way that we interface into the hyperreal is, in fact, a tool, right? Social media as a whole are just different types of, stylings, if you would, or different types of brands of tools we can use. And, no brand is a one-size-fits-all solution, but we all, at the end of the day, are dependent upon our tools to get particular objectives done. Don't put the tools away, all right? Don't throw them out. Don't sacrifice the gifts you've been given. We instead need to hone ourselves to not only be able to wield these tools effectively, to communicate with the greater world and perhaps promote a great message or connect ourselves to friends and family, we must use the technology that we've been given with the proper understanding that we use it, and it ought not to use us. The object of our obsession most often becomes our owner, surprisingly enough. And if we ever get frustrated with the tool, or perhaps to invest in it, then maybe a step back is needed. Not necessarily a full-on detox, I don't believe there's any such thing. However, when bringing up the idea of the gambler, as mentioned, the psychological profile as a gambler, as mentioned in the Social Dilemma documentary, right? A gambler is less able to make certain calculi or assess the probability of a favorable outcome happening. He's less able to make these assessments when he's in the high or depression of a moment. You know what I mean? Sometimes if he feels an overstimulation, he needs to step back. Most important thing is a balance of stimulation, not only from the outside world, right? Because sometimes we need to retreat to our own inside world, and possibly the hyperreal, right? In the same way, we also need to sometimes retreat from the hyperreal. Sometimes we've already, spent too much of our time not living our own lives. And sometimes what we ultimately need to show to the hyperreal, to the digital world, is something of a substance, something we've actually lived and have done, There's only so much embellishing that we can do, only so much dressing we can do in the hyperreal. And that's why it is all just projections at the end of the day, really. Or things are as projected as much as they are perceived. The images is manipulated and photoshopped, well, as glamorous as it seems sometimes. That's what happens when you're on the internet. But there is a few people, a lucky few, not even a lucky few, but a good knowledgeable few that knows to succeed both in the real world by means of the hyperreal, of the internet, of the machinery that we are now growing accustomed to. We must, in this age of humanity, this great turning point, if you would, the most successful people know how to utilize the hyperreal to complete their end. They have not lost focus of what it is they truly want in this world, and understand that the hyperreal is only a means to the end. All right. Many people, they want their validation, their recognition, their likes, follows, shares, right? Or perhaps they fantasize about how amazing it would be to be an Instagram model and have all that publicity and recognition. But really, that's an unhealthy mindset. It's always been an unhealthy mindset for the politician who wants the fame, the power, right? Not understanding the role as of a public servant. In the same way that someone who wants to start a business may have too much of a love for money and may end up being miserly and may cut too much cost, not realizing that his poor decisions, his very miserly decision making might also be killing his clients and consequently making people unhappy. People might begin to sue the guy, and before you know, he's bankrupt. Social media acts as a sort of augmentation for, and of course a mechanism for, the rapid dissemination of human evil. This is what I'm trying to tell you, okay? Take, for instance, fake news, right? In the Social Dilemma, it was postulated that fake news spreads 6 times faster than real news on social media. Guys, do you mean gossip? Do you mean rumors? That's nothing new, okay? That absolutely is nothing new. And what about a lot of girls, teenage girls, suffering from increased rates of anxiety and depression? Well, that's nothing new too. Young females have been quite melodramatic like that, especially in their teenage years, since, the very inception of mankind almost. Especially when there isn't a threat to their survival. And yes, to a certain extent, people perceiving the idealized lives of others and realizing that their lives are very suckish, well, yes, it can hit quite hard to the given, teenage girl. There's no doubt about that. But even then, before all that, that discontentedness was still there. If we are really living our best each and every day, living genuinely, with intent and purpose, working constantly to improve upon ourselves, put ourselves in a better condition, right? Then no man can look at what he has done and say that it is inadequate. How can a man do better than his best? How is that possible? And so, yes, it does make us realize our inadequacies and our shortcomings sometimes. Though, to a certain extent, we have been subconsciously very, miserable with ourselves. And for a female to be afflicted by such things by an increased rate means that she herself is only doubling down and avoiding her problems by burying her head into social media. Avoidance of such problems are nothing new, really, and quite frankly, they make the problems worse as we especially these ontological problems, such as what are we doing on this life, and are we really living our best? These sort of existential questions, well, dodging them is only going to make them worse. And so, at some point, yes, the anxiety and the depression does begin to seep out when people only dig themselves further and further, into these sort of, digital graves, if you would. But now for a more practical problem. What about where we sacrifice our data to these big tech companies? Because, Google is collecting quite a bit of data on us. I mean, how many of us spend a lot of time on YouTube? The thing really makes almost no profits. And yes, it makes, for its own self, but makes a ton of profits for Google. Because YouTube is in fact the ultimate data mining site, as is Facebook, as is Instagram. All these companies are collecting different metrics on people in an attempt to build almost a profile of them. But is it really so sinister that they are building perhaps a repository of our own likes and interests, possibly personality traits? Not quite. I'll give you an example. Would you rather have a screen filled with corny, elderly dating site ads, or would you rather be presented with a series of ads that appeal to your sensibilities? I'm a metalhead. Let's say I want to see a website that sells perhaps heavy metal albums. Perhaps I want to see a site that has a bunch of inside information or teases some exclusive releases coming up very soon. You know what I mean? What if perhaps I'm interested in vintage men's clothes and I would love to see something like a fashion show coming up near me? What about that? Now, it is very terrifying to see, whether or not, to know that someone else, perhaps, well, not really someone else, just an AI, has a little bit of information on you. But the problem is that no one can really do anything with it except market to you. It's not like one master hacksaw can, talk to some other guy on the street, as if they're trading dark secrets and says, hey, John Doe likes the color blue. Alright, you got him there, yeah. That's so useful. No, people are most dangerous information that someone can have on you is your social security number, your date of birth, the things of that nature. And if you're that's one thing that computers and AI are going to have a hard time deducing about you. Those sort of things that are most inherent to you, well, those things you need to keep close to your chest. And if you're not doing so already, now I'm kind of worried about you. As you can see in this day and age, the most important trend is, what are you doing for yourself? Are you holding yourself accountable? It takes a really well-formed individual, a really well-managed individual, a very well-developed individual to manage his own personal affairs and not so much fall under the sway or corruption of social media. It's not even that these things are actually very corrupting in and of themselves, but they do tend to accentuate and expand upon the evils and the shortcomings of ourselves, really. The image that we build online to a certain extent, though idealized, are projections of our own selves. And all of the ills we see nowadays, all the depression and anxiety, they're all reminders. In fact, our lives that we're leading are dissatisfactory, and they'll all be improving, not working towards harming ourselves or ending our own lives. We don't want that. And all these things are happening are just really helpful reminders that we need to be, or not necessarily healthy reminders, but reminders nonetheless. And all these things are reminders that there's a world outside of us that we need to indulge in. Because what we present online, well, it ought to be things, first and foremost, of substance. They need to be things that we can not only dress in the finest of trappings, but things that people will instinctively understand as of great value. Then can come in and these, all the filters and all of the Photoshop and all of that nice stuff, okay? Fine. But if you're not contributing anything of value to society as a whole, well, I mean, it does beg the question, just how plugged in are you? When the machine that we plug into is one that we cannot plug in or plug out of, then that becomes a problem. If you find yourselves burrowing deeper and deeper into your into social media, into playing video games more, into whatever it may be behind your screen, it does beg the question, what are you doing outside? And this isn't to say that you need to disconnect. It is to say that you need to do something with your time outside. You need to be actually living so that you can take it to social media, gain yourself notoriety and interest, and take all the benefits you get off of social media to invest it back into living. Like, once more, because that is ultimately what matters at the end of the day. You need to remember your priorities. You have those in order, you have yourself in order, then you most certainly will succeed in this golden, not even golden age, but I should say, you have yourself in order, you have your priorities in order, you will, I guarantee, make the best of this turning point in human history. One that will lead to a great golden age of technology. And by golly, is a time like this more important than any possibly to come, and any that has been. And why do I say that? Because it's always the turning points that have been most influential in history. It might be it might be golden ages that are most remembered, but for sure, that which has shaped what has ever happened, all the good and the bad, has all been at the fork roads in history. One such as these. Be a great player in it, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And until the next time.